Would you like to hear my reactions to the last 2024 AWS Keynote speech? You come to the right place. So welcome back to the Cloud Computing Insider, the one place where we can tell you how to make cloud computing work for your enterprise. We're going to talk about what works, what does not, and how to find the value in this technology in a balanced and information forward way. And if that interests you, please subscribe, like, and comment. I'm your host, David Linthicum, author, speaker, B-list geek. Let's get started. I got a few recommendations. People wanted a reaction video. Evidently, they're all that out there on YouTube. Around music videos and things like that, and provide a reaction video around a keynote presentation that was given by the CEO of AWS in last year's AWS reInvent conference. So here you go, strap in. We'll see how this goes. Let me know if you like it or not. Oh, cool lasers. This is kind of the way they all work out. They always have a big production in terms of laser shows and high-pitched music. And got to remember, there's about 60,000 people sitting in this auditorium here, believe it or not. So what's going on now is normally have a lead up to the keynote speech, which is going to be a laser show and techno music, things like that. You have to remember there's about 60,000 people sitting in this auditorium now. 60,000 people go to reInvent. Almost everybody, including the press and other companies, are going to attend the keynote presentations. They're really popular events are also very long events. This one's, I think, 2 hours and change. So the CEO will come up, he'll speak, he'll leave the stage, other people will come up, they'll leave the stage, CEO will come back, and they make different announcements and things like that. And right now you're just seeing the lead up to the first presentation. Lots of laser lights. We're going to skip through this. I think it's going to go on for quite some time. Obsessed over security. Scale. They're going to put up little slogans that the company has. Scale cosmically. And these are different theme events that they have for the conference. And so, in other words, the conference is going to have certain keywords and key phrases that they keep using, and they're going to go through this for some time. So you're going to really kind of drink the Kool-Aid whether you like it or not. And this is going to be a pre-done video. They paid a marketing company lots of money to create this video for them. More lasers. More lasers. Generate. It's pretty cool. It's a pretty cool production when you see it in person. And obviously millions of dollars to put this together, but they put on a pretty good show. And most of the conferences now are kind of the same. They kind of do the same, kind of techno show thing. They're kind of all running together in my mind, but AWS keeps up with everybody. They put on a pretty good show. By the way, the voice you hear, they call it a voice of God. Actually, when you read the conference plans, you'll see it'll say above, before you come out, voice of God, and that's basically the person who's announcing you, which is an announcer. Sometimes it's pre-recorded, sometimes there's a person there off stage, has the big radio voice that's announcing some of the stuff. But it's funny to me. They always call it the voice of God because it seems sacrilegious, but oh well.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 13th annual AWS reInvent. So awesome to see you all here. Now, this is my...
By the way, they had another CEO, a different CEO last year for the last year's reInvent. And he replaced Andy Jassy when Andy Jassy was promoted to being the CEO of Amazon when Jeff Bezos left. So this is the second CEO in a few years that they've had. And they had a different one last year. He left the company for whatever reason. I think it said he was going to spend more time with family. I always say that. Who knows the reasons behind it? But now we have Matt Gorman.
First event as CEO, but it's not my first reInvent. I've actually had the privilege to be to every reInvent since 2012. Now, 13 years into this event, a lot has changed. But what hasn't is what makes reInvent so special. bringing together the passionate, energetic AWS community to learn from each other. Just hearing you this morning and as you walk through the halls, you can feel the energy.
By the way, in case you were wondering, there's a teleprompter there below the stage, and that's why he's looking off stage down, because he's reading directly from the teleprompter. And so he's rehearsed this, down to the word, which is always a bit disingenuous to me. I would love to hear them speak off the cuff, but they never do. And even the guests that they call up, they'll have people who are, CIOs and CEOs of other companies that are AWS's customers. They're also reading scripts. And so those scripts are pre-written for them, well rehearsed. They're spending many hours, trying to work this stuff up as a show before this goes on. There's a lot of work that goes into this, but make no mistake, all of this stuff is predetermined. They're not making off-the-cuff remarks down to the jokes that they try to tell. And his jokes, by the way, don't land.
And I encourage you all to take advantage of this week to learn from each other. This year, we have almost 60,000 people here in person and another 400,000 watching online. Thank you to everyone who's watching.
I signed up to watch online and didn't watch. So I watched some of the replays like this one, but I didn't even see this video when it came out, just because everything can be discovered via some of the announcements that they have. So directly after this talk, the press release would go out with whatever they announced. In other words, they held it until the talk, so everybody gets to hear it for the first time. But then you see the press releases, and other magazines out there will write up a good summary of what they said. So instead of sitting through a 2-hour speech, or many people talking for what's going to be 2+ hours, you can just go ahead and get the highlights that way. Another thing you can do is wait for the YouTube video to pop up and go to some sort of an AI system and have it summarize what was said. You're going to find you get a lot more out of these discussions if you do it that way than if you sit through a 2-hour presentation. You just can't pay attention that long, in my mind. At least I can't pay attention that long. So I rarely attend these. I would normally be in my hotel room at this time, or going down and getting the free breakfast, things like that. I'm not going to fight the crowds and go dive into the keynote, because I think it's going to be some sort of a special event and good for me to be there. Some people, they live for this. They go to reInvent every year. It's the highlight of their year. It's always going to be held in Vegas, has lots of pomp and circumstance around it, lots of excitement, which I get it. But the reality is, if you're going there to learn, there's other ways that you can, get around having to attend all the sessions. And I just wait for the press releases.
And we have, in person here, we have 1,900 sessions for you all to attend and almost 3,500 speakers. And many of those speakers and sessions are led by customers, partners, and AWS experts, many of who are in the audience.
By the way, that's never been me, because I'm not biased toward AWS. I would give a multi-cloud presentation, or how to use cloud architecture and leverage different cloud providers, or when not to use a cloud provider, things like that, like we talk about on this channel. So guess what? That means I'm not going to get invited to speak. So I haven't been invited to speak at reInvent ever, not even asked to submit a presentation idea, which is kind of funny. I speak at most of the other events, and certainly the independent cloud events, but reInvent, I'm persona non grata, probably because they can't control the message.
Today, thank you so much. Your sharing your content and your expertise is what makes reInvent so special. Thank you. Now, reInvent has something for everybody. It has stuff for technologists, for executives, for partners, students, and more. But at its core, reInvent is a learning conference really dedicated to builders and specifically to developers.
I do think that's true. reInvent has always been developer focused. So the sessions are always developer focused, things like that. Even the executives, if you look at the profile of the leadership within AWS, very technical types. They, are really kind of think about the technology first, and it's really kind of to their credit, but they're always trying to court the developers. They believe that's where the value is going to be found, and that's how their business is going to grow. And for the most part, in the last 15, 18 years since the business has been around, that's been true. So they continue to focus on the developers, which I think is not necessarily a bad thing for them.
In fact, one of the first things that I did when I took over this role was to spend a little bit of time with our AWS heroes. A shout out to the heroes who I believe are sitting over here. I can hear them already. Our heroes are some of our most dedicated and passionate AWS developers. Thank you so much.
So you can think of who the heroes are. They're basically the people who are all in on AWS, which not necessarily would be a hero in my book, but they're out there, and there's a lot of fanboys and girls around AWS and other cloud providers as well. But AWS has a lot of people who are very passionate about what AWS is. I think that can be a bit problematic, certainly when you're trying to do a balanced architecture and find the best value approach. It's never going to be a single cloud provider, but there's people out there that do. So if you meet somebody who's going to tell you that they're an AWS hero, be very careful in terms of the advice they're going to give you.
And the way the whole AWS developer community has grown is really incredible. We now have 600 user groups all around the world, spanning 120 different countries. And the entire AWS community is many millions all around the world. And one of the great things about that community is we get feedback from you that goes directly into the products and informs what we build and announce here today. So thank you. Now, in 2006 is when I first started AWS, and at AWS when we launched the business. And our very first customers were startups. So startups have a really special place in my heart. And one of the things that I love about startups.
In the early days of AWS, basically, startups were the only pattern of companies that would take a risk on AWS. In other words, the idea of leveraging storage that you didn't own, in other words, physically located outside the company, was something that was new to most of the Global 2000 companies out there, and they were largely rejecting it. They weren't necessarily all in with the public cloud providers. However, startups, because they have little cash, and it used to be you had to buy your infrastructure. The minimum startup fee would be $1 million to get the infrastructure, hardware you need, and data center space to start a technology company. AWS and other cloud providers made that more affordable because you're able to leverage these kinds of resources as a service, and therefore it's going to save your cash that you would normally have to spend on capital stuff, servers and data centers, things like that, in running the company, which is a good thing. So true, he's right that most of the initial users of AWS technologies were startups, and I think that was wasn't necessarily by their design. I think that was the economic issues that these startups were dealing with at the time.
They're anxious to use new technologies. They will jump in, and they give us great feedback. They push us to innovate, they innovate on top of us, and they move really fast, and we learn a ton from startups. Now with generative AI, there is never a more exciting time out there in the world to be a startup. Generative AI has the potential to disrupt every single industry out there. And when you look at disruptors, disruption comes from startups. And so it's a fantastic time, if you're a startup, to really be thinking about how you.
And you're going to find the theme of the entire conference was, hey, guess what? We do generative AI too, and now it's going to be agentic AI. It was agentic a little bit then, but obviously they were, trying to push the generative AI capabilities of the cloud. People viewed AWS as being behind the times in terms of AI. I'm not sure if that's true or not. They've always had an AI offering that was part of their stack, but they definitely have been behind the times in terms of innovation. And I think that they're playing catch up now. And this keynote was evident that the fact of the matter, they keep talking about generative AI, moving the conversation back to generative AI. By the way, here we have generative AI. Did we talk about the generative AI we have? Almost overselling their generative AI capabilities, because the perception is by the industry and probably within the AWS leadership that they're behind the times. And certainly I made the comment before and I stand behind it. I don't think they're as innovative as the AWS was 10 years ago. And so now they find they're playing catch-up football, even to the fact, and this wasn't known at the time of the keynote, but obviously AWS missed their numbers and the stock's been going down, and they view them slowing down in terms of gaining, market share with some of the enterprises out there. And so they're dealing with that now as well. And you can kind of see the genesis of it during this speech.
Disrupt industries. In fact, we support startups so much, I'm excited to announce that in 2025, AWS will provide $1 billion in credits to startups globally as we continue to invest in your success.
That's funny money, by the way. So it's AWS money. They're giving away their services. Obviously, there's a cost associated with that, but it's not like they're giving them the money.
Now, while startups were our first customers, it actually didn't take long for enterprises to catch on. And so enterprises quickly realized there's a ton of value in the cloud. And today, the largest enterprises across every single industry in the world, every single vertical, every single size, every single government are running on AWS. Millions of customers running in every imaginable use case. But it wasn't actually always this way. So one story from early on I'd like to share is it was early on in our AWS journey, and we took a trip to New York to visit some of the banks. And they were really interested in what this whole cloud computing thing was. And so we sat down with them, and they were very curious, and we outlined our vision for how cloud computing could change how they do run their IT and run their technology. And they told us, they said, you know what, I think it's very unlikely that any of our production workloads are ever going to run in the cloud. And they sat down, and they were very diligent, and they gave us a whole list of reasons. There's compliance, there's audit, there's regulatory, there's security, there's encryption. All of these things are reasons why they would love to. It's a compelling technology, but probably never going to run in the cloud. So it would have been super easy for us to say, okay, guess that's not worth our time, and go to the next customer. But that's not what we did. And actually, I'd love to thank those financial services customers that we sat down with, because they really helped us understand what it would take to support large regulated customers inside of the cloud. And as AWS, we really wanted to support every customer, so we spent the better part of the next decade ticking every single thing off of those lists. And I'm proud to say that many of those large financial companies are customers of ours today.
So early days of cloud, AWS did not have, and there were no other cloud providers in the market, by the way, when this first came out. Microsoft was transitioning from a PaaS-based play into an infrastructure as a service-based play with Azure, and Google was doing the same thing. They had a platform as a service play, and then obviously moved it to infrastructure as a service as well. But the missing features were security, governance, operational, capabilities, things like that. And that delayed many of these enterprises in moving to the cloud until those capabilities were going to be there. So obviously, AWS looked at that as a key enabling technology that they needed to build with inside their stack. And so they focused on security, operations, governance, things like that. And it took them, in their credit, it took them a fairly short period of time to build up a security, governance, operations stack that was fairly compelling, in many cases better than some of the stuff you can get on premises. So that's kind of the story in terms of how AWS inflected. They were kind of the first to the market with a viable stack that had everything in it, including security, governance, and operations.
And so, when you're innovating, one of the important things to remember is you really want to start with the customer. You want to ask them what's important to them. But then you don't always just deliver what the customer asks for. You want to invent on their behalf. We call this at Amazon as starting with the customer and working backwards. Listening to them, understanding what they want, and then work backwards to what's a fantastic product. And that customer focus and working backwards is really part of our AWS DNA. And it's how we approach the business from the very beginning. In fact, the original AWS vision document that we wrote was written in 2003.
By the way, I haven't looked at the past reInvent keynotes, but I suspect that's plus or minus 10%. Were of the same story. And so in other words, they're just giving you the history, the baseline of the company. Again, he's reading a script.
And at the time, there was a lot of technology companies that were building these bundled solutions that would try to do everything for you. And what they ended up doing is there's these big monolithic solutions that would do everything fine, like it was good enough. And we had this observation that good enough shouldn't be all you strive for. You want the best possible component. It would be great if you could take the little bit of everything that was best and combine them together. And with that idea, AWS was born.
As long as it's in AWS. So what the argument would be that we should be taking a best of breed approach to using whatever components that we need to bring together to build our systems. Obviously in the world of AWS, everything has to exist in their walled garden, run in their ecosystem, and that's what they sell. So they're going to sell, their databases, their storage systems, their compute platforms, things like that. And so normally, where we part company is the fact that I view best of breed as everything and anything, including other public cloud providers, things you can find on-prem, everything that is available to become your solution. We're trying to find the best architectural solution that's going to bring the most value back to the business. And almost always, it's not going to be a single cloud provider that provides you everything in the stack that you're going to need. So fundamentally disagree with that But it is really kind of core to the fact that they're a business and they operate in their own selfish interests, and they're selling the services that they have.
And we made this other observation. You could take almost any application out there, and you could break it down into individual components. It could be decomposed into these core services. And we call these core services building blocks. And this idea was that if you had these services that were the best in the world at doing this one specific thing.
Just for you old timers there, he's referring that to like service-oriented architecture, service-based development, microservice-based development. You'll probably get to that.
And they did that job really, really well. And you made it easy to combine a bunch of these services together in new and unique ways. Then people could really build interesting things, and you'd have a better model for how to consume technology and how to build companies. Now, this building block concept has been fundamental to how we build AWS services over the last 18 years. And today, we have hundreds of AWS services that you all combined in unique and different, interesting, incredible ways. So one of the things I thought would be pretty fun is throughout the day today is to hear from some startup founders who are taking these building blocks and combining them in cool and interesting ways to redefine how problems get solved in their space. Let's hear from the first one of these founders now.
And this is when he starts inviting customers up to the stage to, basically provide their own, testimonial in terms of how they're leveraging AWS to a successful end state. One of the things that bugs me about that is you're just going to hear the positive things. It would be really nice if they went up there and said, yeah, this worked, this didn't work. I wish we didn't do this with AWS. I wish we, in other words, it's never going to be this pure play. AWS is great at everything kind of a thing. When you look at architectural problems, I really wish that you got both sides, of the view, and your ability to look at the downsides and upsides of leveraging any technology, including AWS. That doesn't mean AWS isn't going to be, heralded, as having great technology, but they're a piece of the component. They're a piece of the architecture, not the architecture itself. And it kind of bugs me when people don't get that and they go to these conferences, have a tendency of drinking the Kool-Aid, get all in bias around a particular technology set, not looking at the viability of the technology and how it's going to sit within the enterprise and where it's going to add value. And I think a lot of organizations got in trouble with that approach to cloud computing.
Proteins have the potential to solve some of the most important challenges facing our societies. Many important drugs are proteins. Evolutionary Scale develops,
once again, marketing videos that were made on behalf of AWS reInvent
AI for the life sciences. We have developed the ESM family of models, which are used by scientists around the world to understand and design proteins. As soon as we founded the company, our first compute was on AWS, and we were early users of HyperPod. This allowed us to do the iterative development that was critical for creating ESM3. ESM3 is a model that reasons over the sequence, structure, and function of proteins. It's been trained on 1 trillion.
And notice they're getting quickly into the AI stuff, AI components of it. And so most of this conference is going to be about whether it's sessions, some of the keynote presentations, AI. In fact, cloud computing conferences, inclusive of reInvent, have just become generative AI, agentic AI conferences in general, which is getting a little boring. I think I understand it's important technology. I've been dealing with AI since the 80s as an analyst, but it's a component. It's not necessarily going to be the end-all, end state of every application out there. But now they're going to push it pretty hard.
Flops of compute on over 2 billion protein sequences. Through this training, it's developed a very deep understanding of the biology of proteins that allows science.
Going to go through some of the marketing videos. And so he may not be speaking, he's just the video. So they sent a film crew out to his office and ended up being on the AWS keynote. And our hero is back. Applause.
It's actually mind-blowing and really incredible what the team at Evolutionary Scale is building. Really cool. Thank you. And now, there are a lot of reasons why customers choose AWS. But there is one thing that almost everybody really cares a lot about, from startups to enterprises to governments. And what that is security. Now, when we started AWS, we understood from day one that security was going to have to be our top priority. We knew that you all were trusting us with your data. You're building your business on top of us, and that's a responsibility that we took really seriously. And so for us,
and you'll see those slogans start appearing behind him as he talks about it. Security, everything starts with security, developers first, all that kind of stuff. Get into the theme of the conference, just from the marketing team. So everything here is very well crafted from the marketing organizations. Every word is planned. Every message is planned. Every video is planned. Just kind of keep that in mind. You're not getting off the cuff information from this. You're just getting a marketing script at the end of the day, which, you may like it. And if you want to go there for the experience, that's many cases what these things are now.
We knew that security had to be the foundation of what we built that business on. And so for us, part of what we understood is that security is part of your culture, right? It's something that you can't bolt on after the fact, right? It's not something that you can go launch and then add security. You have to do it from the beginning. And so for us, security matters in every single thing that we do. It matters in how we design our data centers. It matters in how we design our silicon. It matters in how we design our virtualization stack, in our service architectures, and maybe most importantly, in all of our software development practices, where security has to be front and center from the very beginning, from the design phase, to the implementation phase, to the deployment phase, to the patching, et cetera. Super important. Everything starts with security, top of mind. And with AWS, security is one of the reasons that so many customers are trusting AWS with their cloud workloads. It's this core foundational layer that all of the rest of our services kind of build on top of. All right, speaking of one of those building blocks, let's jump in and talk about the first one, compute. Now today, AWS offers more compute instances than any other provider by a long shot, and it all started with EC2.
He's right. The biggest cloud provider, infrastructure as a service provider, by a big margin. Second would be AWS. Third would be Google. And then there's some other providers, Alley Cloud and Oracle and IBM, that play in the game. But they were the first to offer, first services out in the market were a storage service. I believe it offered S3, 10, 15 years ago, whenever it first started. And then they switched to compute, basically providing virtual compute instances. And they're definitely the leader in that space.
Now, some of you might know, I actually used to lead the EC2 team for many years. Now, in my current role, technically I'm probably not allowed to say I have favorites, but I really love EC2. The good news is lots of customers love it too. And why? Because EC2 has more options, more instances, and more capabilities. And it helps you find the exact right performance for the app or for your workload that you need. In fact, at this point, we've grown to where EC2 has 850 different instance types across 100.
So those are, you're able to pick the processors, multiple processors, the memory configuration, the operating system you run, Windows NT, Linux, and the different flavors of Linux. It's all up there. And if you use AWS, you already know this. In other words, and it is truly going to be an advantage that I can go to AWS, configure a virtual server, a compute instance, with any number of things that I need for my applications. It's going to be expensive in doing that, but they do provide that capability, which gives you the agility aspects of it, speed to market aspects of it, which are the value of all clouds. And now Google has a comparable offering in this space, so does Microsoft and Oracle. Probably not as many as types of instances in the space. AWS is very good at, when in doubt, they throw it in. So into the stack. But it's everybody kind of playing the game, but they definitely are the leader in that space. And if you want to learn about compute, take a look at AWS, go on a free tier and things like that, and configure some instances, see what they do.
In 26 different families. What that means is you can always find the exact right instance type for the workload that you need. So if you're running, say, a big database or an analytics workload, we have the largest storage instances.
By the way, a type of instance also too would be TPUs, tensor process units, and GPUs, graphics processor units in support of AI. Obviously, there's going to be more money, but they allow you to do that. And you can run any number of operating systems on top of those processors as well.
That you can run anywhere in the cloud. Let's say you have an app that has in-memory requirements. We have the instances with the largest footprint anywhere for those latent sensitivity needs that you have. Now let's say you're running an HPC cluster or a large AI and ML cluster. and you need really fast networking to connect all of those nodes together, AWS has by far the fastest and most scalable network to keep all of your HPC instances or ML instances together. And we work hard to ensure that you
HPC is high performance computing, by the way.
always have the latest technology. So you always have instances with the latest advancements from Intel or AMD or NVIDIA. And AWS was the first and continues to be the only cloud that offers Mac-based instances. So one question that I get from a lot of customers.
So that means you can run a virtual Mac computing operating system out on AWS, which is something that a lot of people do. Probably not a place to put high capacity computing stuff, but Mac's operating systems, which are derivative of Unix, can be supported on AWS as well.
Is how do you possibly sustain that level of innovation? What allows you to deliver so much? One of the answers to that is Nitro. Nitro is our AWS virtualization system. Effectively, what we did is we designed a custom chip that offloads all of the virtualization for networking, for storage, and from compute off into this separate Nitro card system you see up here. What that allows us to do is it allows us to deliver bare metal performance. It allows us to deliver unparalleled security and isolation for customers that's unmatched anywhere in the cloud. But an interesting other benefit of Nitro is it gives us a ton of flexibility. See, when we move all of the virtualization off into this Nitro system separately, it allows us to innovate independently. So we don't have to redo the virtualization stack every time we have a new instance type. We can simply develop a great new server and develop the virtualization stack independently and put them together.
That means the way in which they're able to manage tenants. So he's telling you about the behind the scenes technology they use to get these instance types up and running. Interesting, but it's funny. I was like, most people there just want it to work. They're not necessarily interested in the technology behind it. So that's what he's going into. I wouldn't, give it much credence other than knowing that it's there. So in other words, everybody has a multi-tenant, technology. They're running all the infrastructure as a service clouds. This is theirs.
That allows us to move much faster. And it's interesting. Nitro has been one of the keys that has really unlocked the speed of innovation in compute in AWS. The other interesting thing about Nitro is it really taught us about developing custom silicon. And with the success of Nitro, we saw, we can be successful at building silicon. And so we look.
So he's transitioning the fact that they're building their own chips, which is good because if they're using a multi-tenant system that's built just for AWS, which we're using, obviously custom building chips to support that multi-tenant environment is going to be helpful because you're able to optimize the chip design for how you're going to use it. And so that's kind of what he's talking about here.
Where else maybe we could apply this skill? Now in 2018, we saw a trend in compute. We were looking out there and we saw that ARM cores were getting faster. Most of them were in mobile, but they were getting more powerful. And we had this idea that there's this opportunity that maybe we could go combine that technology curve with our knowledge of what's most important to customers running inside of AWS and develop a custom general purpose processor. Now, at the time, this was a very controversial idea, right? Because that seems crazy that we would go develop our own silicon. But we were pretty convicted that we could deliver really differentiated value to customers. And so we dove in and we launched Graviton. Fast forward to today, Graviton is widely used by almost every AWS customer out there. Graviton delivers 40% better price performance than x86. It uses 60% less energy. That is fantastic. So you can both reduce your carbon footprint and get better price performance. And Graviton is growing.
Now, the better price performance you'll hear a lot, but as you know, AWS, all the greatness that they're able to do in the technology sector, they're able to provide, and many of that stuff is true. They have good technology, but the price is where we're kind of parting here. Is that they'll talk about price performance for whatever reason the enterprises out there aren't using it efficiently, or AWS isn't providing it efficiently, or the prices are too high. Just over and over again, we're seeing these amazingly huge cloud bills that are far greater than we thought they were going to be initially when I think people moved their workloads into the cloud. So just calling attention to that. At the end of the day, Price performance means what my bill is going to be at the end of the month based on me running a workload and storing stuff on your cloud. And if that's going to be high, then price performance isn't going to be there for me. And that needs to be understood and should be explained, I think, as part of his keynote presentation.
Going like crazy. Let's put this into context. In 2019, all of AWS was a $35 billion business. Today, there's as much Graviton running in the AWS fleet as all compute in 2019. It's pretty impressive growth. A few months ago, we launched Graviton 4. Graviton 4 is the most powerful Graviton chip yet. And now, with this more powerful chip, Graviton can address a much broader set of workloads, including things like scale-up workloads like databases or other things that need really large instances. Graviton 4 delivers 30% more power compute.
Again, this is part of the infrastructure that they care about because it's where the instances are running on top of. This is important for AWS. They're selling it as important to the customer. Yeah, maybe. It'd be nice to know, what our systems are running on and the processors and the silicon and the chipsets it's running on. But it's it doesn't make much of a difference, I think, to the cloud bills that some of the enterprises are seeing. So this pushing and talking about, the different chip processors and the fact we're customizing the thing, that would be amazing to me if I just saw the prices go down. And I'm not seeing that.
Power per core, but it also has 3 times the number of vCPUs as Graviton 3, as well as 3x the memory, so you can get much larger instance sizes. And it's not just more instance sizes and bigger instance sizes. Graviton is really having a material impact on customers' businesses. Let's take a look at somebody like Pinterest. Now, Pinterest was running thousands of x86 instances.
And you're going to see
they're
going a lot of customers.
And they made the decision to move to Graviton. When they moved, not only did they see that they had lower pricing for Graviton, they actually got absolutely better performance from every instance, so they're actually able to reduce their footprint. This means that...
I would love to hear the before and after pricing. Lower from what? Moving from what instance? Was it on AWS, moving to another AWS instance using Graviton, or something else? I would love to get, kind of an apples to oranges comparison or apples to apples comparison as to what are the key benefits? How did they get the benefits? Where were they before? Where they are now? And, really kind of, expose where the cost savings are going to be.
Because of Graviton, they reduced their compute costs by 47%. There's not a lot of things out there that you can do that can reduce the cost of your entire compute footprint by 47%. It's pretty incredible. And because Pinterest cares a ton about how energy efficient they are, they cut their carbon emissions by 62%. And they're not alone.
The carbon emission things is always a bit suspect to me. You're going to hear this systemically through all of these, cloud computing conferences, talk about the carbon footprint, energy usage, carbon. And typically there's no information behind that. In other words, they're assuming because they're using less compute, that's going to translate into less power, which is going to translate into less carbon generated. In some cases, that's going to be true. Not all cases, though. And I think people overuse it, over rely on it. In many cases, these are, these are unproven data points. Just kind of keep that in mind. If you're, into the environment, you want to see, carbon minimized. You're not always going to get the real information out of people are saying when they say reduce carbon footprint. That needs to be proven out as to what's going on. I've seen many cases where I've audited systems and they said it's going to have 50% reduction in the carbon footprint. And then I looked at the core resources that they're leveraging, the cloud providers are running on, things like that. And it kind of came up, they're using 75% more carbon, even if the power was the same. It was where it's run, when data centers that are being coal-fired, things like that, all that stuff kind of comes into play. So take this with a grain of salt. People have a tendency to throw these around. No, you have no way of checking them. And I wouldn't be necessarily impressed by those numbers.
90% of the top 1,000 EC2 customers have all started using Graviton. It's awesome to see so many customers benefiting from this innovation.
So it's their own chipset. Probably has a
benefit.
benefit.
But I will tell you, time does not stand still. And if there has been one constant in my time at AWS, it's that workloads are constantly evolving, which means customers are looking to us to say, how can you come up with better solutions for these new workloads? And today, by far the biggest compute problem out there involve AI and specifically generative AI.
Here we go.
Now, the vast majority of generative AI workloads today run on NVIDIA GPUs, and AWS is by far the best place in anywhere in the world to run GPU workloads. Part of the reason is because AWS and NVIDIA have been collaborating together for 14 years to ensure that we're really great at about operating and running.
Got to remember, interest in NVIDIA wasn't just around the generative AI revolution started about 3 years ago. NVIDIA's been around for a long time. It was GPU processor. It was advertised in PC Magazine when I wrote articles in PC Magazine when I was in my 20s. But everybody has a relationship with NVIDIA, and it's almost like mandatory. You have to have the NVIDIA relationship on the screen. So NVIDIA's got to be happy about that. Everybody is, putting a lot of emphasis on the core business relationship with the NVIDIA as a processor. But we're just seeing too much of it everywhere. It's just kind of systemic to everything, where it doesn't really mean much anymore, in my opinion.
GPU workloads. Just this last year, we launched G6 instances, G6Es, P5Ns, all powered by NVIDIA Tensor Core GPUs. Now, in fact, because AWS has the best, most scalable network and has by far the most operationally excellent place to run large workloads, NVIDIA actually chose AWS as the place to run their own large-scale generative AI cluster. And I'll tell you today that we're doubling down on that partnership. So today, I'm happy to announce the P6 family of instances. P6 instances will feature the new Blackwell chips from NVIDIA, and they'll be coming early next year. P6 instances will give you up to 2.5 times.
So they're just selling the NVIDIA chips on Amazon as an instance. In other words, if you're, instead of buying a server and putting it in your data center, it has a Blackwell chip in it, and spinning it up, putting operating systems on it, and running it, as an AI processor, training, inference, things like that, you're able to do on an AWS, which you've been able to do for a long period of time, and you can do so on the other cloud providers. The issue is not that you can do that, but really it should because they're typically uneconomically viable based on using some of the on-prem solutions. And also, every time that you need to run an AI based system, AI instance, training, inference processing, things like that, you don't always need a GPU. And you certainly, if you need a GPU, you don't always need the latest and greatest GPU that NVIDIA just released. And many times, if you're careful with engineering your system and doing it correctly, you can leverage, off-the-shelf processors, even CPUs versus GPUs, because we're building the efficiency in the engineering, not necessarily throwing processors at it. And I think many of the enterprises right now will push money and push processors at the problem, thinking that everybody has to have the latest and greatest NVIDIA, GPU, chip to run their AI workloads. That's not the case. Most of the implementations of AI that we're going to see in the enterprises out there are going to be small language model based. They're going to be very tactical use cases. They're not necessarily going to be an LLM for the business. If they're leveraging large language models, it's going to be as a service. In other words, they're leveraging somebody else's systems. They're not going to build those environments because it's too cost prohibitive to do so. And it's going to be perfectly okay to use commodity instances to run many of these AI systems. How do I know that? Because I'm building these now. And everybody, I think, has a false understanding of where the infrastructure needs to be to support these generative AI systems. And they're not going to be as heavy duty and costly as I think people are understanding them to be. So kind of keep that in mind. I think we're overthinking some of the AI stuff here and probably overspending.
Faster compute than the current generation of GPUs. That is fantastic. We expect P6s to be incredibly popular across a broad range of generative AI applications, and super excited to see what you all start building with them early next year when they announce. Now, at AWS, however, we are never satisfied. And so when we built Graviton, we saw that we could build a processor that was actually getting adopted and delivering value to customers. And so we looked and we thought, what else could we do? And as we saw out there in the compute world, we saw another trend emerging, which we just talked about, which is actually, even in 2018, we saw that accelerator instances and ML, deep learning at the time, was going to be a big trend. We maybe didn't know how big, but we knew that this was going to be a big deal. And we said, maybe we could go in and think about building AI chips as well, because we thought that this was going to be a big area in this space. And so, but we looked at it, and those chips were going to be much more complicated. We knew that that was going to be harder, but we also knew that that was an area that we thought we could bring differentiated value, much like we did with Graviton. And so we decided to jump in and do it. The first chip we launched was in 2019, was Inferentia, which is a really good first step and allowed us to really lower the cost for small inference workloads. In particular, Alexa was one.
You get it, yeah, AI on the training side, Trainium, and then AI on the inference side, Inferentia, so making up words. I think it's kind of funny. It would have been nice if they just said, here's our training chip and here's our inference chip, but no, we have to come up with made-up names.
Of our first big inferential workloads, and they were able to save a ton of money moving to Inferentia. Then, in 2022, we launched our very first training chip called Trainium 1. Now, Trainium had some really great early adopters, enterprises like Banco, IBM, Ricoh, and startups like Ninja Tech and RCAI. But we knew that the first training chip wasn't going to be perfect. We also knew it wasn't going to be a fit for every workload. We knew if a workload could work on Trainium 1, we thought that customers could probably save about 50% of their workloads, and many of those early adopters did. But we also knew that it was early, the software was early, and it wasn't going to be perfect for every workload. But we saw enough traction, we saw enough interest from customers, and enough savings that it gave us confidence that we were on the right path.
There's that savings word again.
So last year at reInvent this time, we announced that we were building Trainium 2. And today, I'm excited to announce the GA of Trainium 2 powered TRN2 instances.
I just don't see people getting excited about chip releases. So I guess people do. They're computer engineers out there that build these things. But to me, I just kind of want the bottom line. What are the capabilities? How am I going to use it? Is it going to save me any money? Is it going to provide better cost performance? There's that word again, 2 words. And if, they have to explain that to me, and, that's how I value those things. So I'm not sure if these chip announcements, which they're doing early in the show, by the way, you'll see as they get later in the show, they get on to, different, more exciting releases, and they have a crescendo up until the end of the week when they, have their bigger announcements. So build up, have your better announcements toward the end, keep people in suspense. But the chip releases, don't do it for me.
Now, Trainium 2 instances are our most powerful instances for generative AI, all because of these custom-built processors completely built in-house by AWS. Now, Trainium 2 delivers 30 to 40% better price performance than current GPU-powered instances. 30 to 40% better. That is performance that you cannot get anywhere else. TRN2 instances have 16 Trainium 2 chips that are all connected by a high bandwidth, low latency interconnect we call Neuralink. And one Trainium 2 instance will deliver 20.8 petaflops from a single compute node. Really cool. These are purpose-built for the demanding workloads of cutting-edge generative AI training and inference. Again, Trainium 2 instances are going to be fantastic for training and inference. Naming is not always perfect for us, but now, Trainium 2 adds a ton of choice for customers so that they have now more choices as they think about what is the perfect instance for the workload that they're working on. And EC2 has by far the most opportunities for different choices. We actually worked with a couple of early customers to beta test Trainium 2 to make sure that we were on the right track, and we saw some pretty impressive early results. Adobe is seeing very promising early testing when they started running Trainium 2 against their Firefly inference model, and they expect to save significant amounts of money. Poolside is a startup who
expect to save versus what they can save. We could figure that out, by the way. It's fairly easy to do the calculations. I would love to get some real numbers in place here, because much of this stuff comes down to that. In other words, all the cool technology, that they're pushing out, I kind of get it. I understand why people are excited about it. But what the stuff is going to cost, understanding that we don't have an infinite budget within the Global 2000 enterprises out there or within the government. So where is the cost of value? What are the use cases where this stuff should be applied? And where shouldn't it be applied? Why not say that? And if we're going to say it's going to save money, how much money can we expect to save? And I would love to get those questions answered, and they never are. The minute I ask them, if I'm talking to a provider, not just AWS, by the way, but all of them, you get some platitude answers, talking about how much effort they put into it, how much money they invested, things like that. They may not know the answer to that. And I'd love to hear them say, yeah, we don't know. We're going to work that out. We're going to get it with our customers. We're going to see what they're able to save, and we'll get back to you with a definite answer. That would be perfect to me.
Building a next generation software development plan and is planning to train all future models of their large frontier model all on Trainium 2. Poolside expects to save
Those are their own LLMs, by the way. So in other words, their own large language models. And by the way, just a bit of a sub rant, there's 100 of them out there now. Everybody seems to be building their LLM. They're really expensive to train. They do have some capabilities and, preferences, able to do things better than other LLMs, but we need 100 of them? And because they're all kind of the same, plus or minus 10%. You're going to get the same answers and the same responses for about 99% of what you're going to leverage them for in the business processing. So I don't understand why we need a bunch of them out there. And they are ungodly expensive to train. They take millions of dollars to get these things together. Remember how excited everybody was because DeepSeek did it and with only $10 million? Well, that's because the other ones cost hundreds of $100 million to get them out. And I even think they're probably underpricing what they actually spent in looking at that. So the foundation models, everybody thinks they need their own. I don't think they need their own. So plenty of open source models out there work perfectly fine. And basically you can use LLMs for free. So I don't know why we got into a big circle and decided we're all going to build large language models, all of the technology providers out there.
40% over the alternative options. Databricks is one of the largest data and AI companies anywhere in the world. And they plan to use Trainium 2 to deliver better results and lower their TCO for our joint customers by up to 30%.
So obviously he's just going to go down the list. So let me know how you like this and how you like these videos. If you want me to do some more reaction videos, obviously I have lots of keynotes coming up, not just AWS, but IBM and Microsoft and Google and Dell and all the other conferences that are coming up. And let me know if you're looking for some commentary around some of the keynotes that are out there. It makes it better for me. It's the first time I watch this keynote. I normally just read the highlights, but I'm happy to put some reality around some of this stuff for you. So anyway, don't forget to like and subscribe, and also check out our other videos here. Also, check out my book, An Insider's Guide to Cloud Computing, my Cloud Computing InfoWorld blog, my 100+ LinkedIn learning courses, and of course, my AI architecture course out on GoCloudCareers. So until next time, you guys stay very safe. Bye.